The sun had just begun to rise over the jagged silhouette of the Wind River Range, casting a soft golden light over the remote trailhead leading to Mt. Hooker. The crisp mountain air carried a faint scent of pine and the distant trickle of melting snow. It was early June, and though the valley below was green and bursting with summer life, the peaks still bore the white scars of winter. A beat-up gray SUV pulled into the gravel lot. The engine coughed once before going quiet. The doors opened, and out stepped a man in his early 40s and a teenage girl, around 15, with a backpack nearly as tall as she was. The man, Nathan Harding, stretched his arms and let out a satisfied grunt. His daughter, Lily, tightened her boot laces and double-checked her gear with practiced confidence. They weren't amateurs. They had climbed together for years, Yosemite, the Tetons, even parts of the Andes the summer before. But this trip felt different. It wasn't just another climb, it was their first time back to Wyoming since Nathan's wife, Lily's mother, had passed away 2 years earlier. This was a pilgrimage as much as an adventure. A nearby park ranger, sipping coffee from a thermos, gave a casual wave. Nathan returned it with a smile and approached the ranger to sign the wilderness permit. The ranger recognized him from a few years back. "Going up Hooker?" he asked. Nathan nodded, thinking of taking the northeast face. Less traffic, more solitude. The ranger raised an eyebrow. "That route's gnarly. Weather's been shifty lately." Nathan shrugged, glancing at the clear blue sky. "Forecast says we've got a good window. We'll be cautious." Lily stood beside him, her face calm but alert. She had her mother's sharp eyes and Nathan's quiet confidence. The ranger looked at Lily, then back at Nathan. "You two be careful. That face doesn't forgive mistakes." Nathan nodded solemnly. "We've got sat radios and enough supplies for 10 days. Just going up for a few, though. Should be back by Thursday." The ranger jotted the expected return date into his logbook, unaware it would become the last record of them for over a decade. They headed toward the trail, walking side by side. The weight of their packs didn't slow them much. Along the way, they passed through lush alpine meadows, the wildflowers swaying in the breeze. Lily snapped photos of the scenery, occasionally stopping to jot notes in a small journal tucked into the mesh side pocket of her bag. She was documenting the trip for a school project she never got to turn in. They hiked in sync, saying little but understanding everything. They stopped for lunch near a narrow creek, where Lily dipped her toes into the icy water and Nathan used the time to check their route on the map. They laughed together over a shared granola bar, and when a hawk soared above them, Lily pointed it out with delight. "Mom would have loved this," she said. Nathan looked at the bird and gave a quiet nod. "She's probably watching now." By late afternoon, the trail gave way to steeper ground. Snow patches lingered in the shadows of tall granite walls. Mt. Hooker rose ahead of them, monolithic, gray, and streaked with ice. Nathan stopped and studied the face through a small pair of binoculars. He murmured to Lily, pointing out possible lines, where to camp, where to avoid loose rock. She listened carefully, nodding. She wasn't just his daughter, she was his climbing partner. As they disappeared into the thinning trees, the light began to shift, casting long shadows across the valley. The ranger, packing up at his outpost for the night, glanced back at the empty parking lot. Something about the way they walked, calm, confident, quietly determined, stayed with him. But nothing seemed wrong. No red flags. No signs of hesitation. That evening, the sky remained cloudless, and the stars emerged one by one. Somewhere high on the trail, Nathan and Lily pitched their first camp on a flat ridge, ate a simple meal, and crawled into their sleeping bags under a canopy of stars. Lily wrote in her journal by headlamp, ending with, "Can't wait to summit with Dad. It's cold, but beautiful. This mountain feels like it's been waiting for us." It had. 3 days after Nathan and Lily Harding vanished into the wilderness of Wyoming's Wind River Range, the weather shifted with a suddenness that only the mountains could deliver. The skies, once clear and endlessly blue, darkened without warning. Thick clouds rolled in, swallowing the peaks in a suffocating shroud of gray. Winds picked up, howling through the canyons like a warning cry from the earth itself. Snow began to fall, not the gentle kind that dances on the air, but heavy, wet snow that blanketed everything in silence and weight. Back at the ranger station, the logbook still sat on the desk with Nathan's signature scrawled across the page. The expected return date passed with little concern. Many climbers were known to extend trips by a day or two, especially when chasing a summit. But when Thursday turned to Friday and the trailhead parking lot remained empty, unease began to stir. By Saturday morning, the ranger who had seen them off radioed his superior. "Hardings still haven't come back. No sign of their vehicle. Weather's trash up there." His voice was low, but not yet panicked. Protocol required waiting 48 hours past the expected return. But this wasn't a case of weekend campers, it was a father and daughter, climbing a notoriously dangerous route, last seen heading toward one of the most remote and unforgiving faces in the Rockies. A team was assembled by afternoon. Helicopters were grounded by whiteout conditions, so a group of 4 rangers began the ascent on foot. They moved slowly, hampered by the deep snow and rapidly dropping temperatures. Visibility was poor. The terrain, already difficult, had become treacherous. Ice sheets formed over boulders. Even familiar landmarks were distorted beneath the snow. They searched for anything, boot prints, discarded wrappers, broken branches, but the storm had erased all signs of movement. It was as if the mountain had swallowed the Hardings whole. No smoke trails from a fire, no sound of a whistle, no sign of distress. The next morning, skies cleared briefly, and a chopper was dispatched. The pilot circled for hours, tracing the ridges and cliffs with a trained eye. At one point, he hovered over the northeast face of Mt. Hooker, scanning the vertical wall. Nothing stood out. No color, no gear, no unnatural marks. Just endless gray rock, speckled with ice. Back at the base, the Hardings' vehicle was unlocked and checked for clues. Inside were a few empty water bottles, a trail map, and a family photo tucked into the sun visor. Nathan, Lily, and her late mother stood smiling in front of a glacier, arms wrapped tightly around one another. The photo was faded but untouched. As the days passed, the mood among rescuers grew heavy. More rangers were called in. Drones were flown over canyons and drainages. Volunteers from nearby climbing communities offered to assist. Nathan had a reputation, cautious, smart, a reliable leader. No one could imagine he'd have taken a reckless route or pushed Lily beyond her limits. But nature doesn't weigh intentions. By day 10, the search transitioned from rescue to recovery. Quietly. The words weren't said out loud, but everyone felt it. The chances of survival after that many nights in the snow, even with gear, were slim. Hypothermia, a fall, an avalanche, any number of things could have happened. The Wind River Range was beautiful, but it was indifferent. It offered no answers. Lily's mother arrived from Oregon that same week. She refused to speak to the press but stood alone at the trailhead for hours, staring at the trail that had stolen her family. She held the same photo found in the car, clutched in gloved hands. A final sweep of the northeast face was done by helicopter and elite climbers. They rappelled down sections of the cliff, checked every crack and ledge within reach, but there was nothing. No gear, no rope, no sign of a fall. Eventually, the search was called off. Winter came early that year. Snow piled high on the slopes. The Hardings' story became local legend, a tragic mystery. The mountain, vast and unfeeling, gave no clues. It was as if father and daughter had simply disappeared into the rock itself, leaving behind only echoes, memories, and a question no one could answer. And then, for 11 long years, silence. The years passed slowly, each one marking another rotation of unanswered questions and aching silence in the small Wyoming town near the Wind River Range. But even as the world moved on, the story of Nathan and Lily Harding never quite faded from the hearts of those who had known them, or even those who hadn't. Their disappearance had become more than just a tragic mystery. It had woven itself into the identity of the community, like a scar hidden beneath years of healing. At the high school where Lily had once been a sophomore, her locker remained untouched for a full year after she vanished. Students placed sticky notes, photographs, and dried flowers on it. One friend taped up a photo of Lily mid-laugh, arms raised, her hair messy from the wind. Another wrote, "You were the bravest person I knew." Even as new students arrived and time marched on, the space she once occupied lingered in whispers and old yearbooks. The hiking club she had helped revive never changed its name, Lily's League, they called themselves. Local businesses kept small photos of Nathan and Lily near their registers. The gas station by the trailhead still had their missing persons poster pinned beside the coffee machine. A faded image of the two smiling in climbing gear greeted every traveler heading toward the range. Some asked about it out of curiosity. Others simply nodded in quiet respect. The owner never took it down. When they're found, she'd always say, "We'll take it down." Lily's mother, Marla, moved back to Oregon but returned every year on the anniversary of their disappearance. She never made a scene. She stayed at the same roadside inn, left flowers and a letter at the trailhead cairn, and walked part of the route her daughter and ex-husband had taken. Locals would see her sitting quietly on a bench near the ranger station, holding her daughter's journal, one she had scanned and printed from Lily's school files. It contained notes on rock formations, quotes from her favorite books, and a list of the summits she hoped to climb before she turned 20. That list stopped at number 7. Mount Hooker was number 8. Some locals believed the mountain had taken them for a reason. "That place has moods," an old trail guide once said at a town hall meeting. "It knows things. It doesn't give everyone back." There were stories of climbers who had seen things, shadows near cliffs, echoes that sounded like voices, gear left in strange places. None of it was ever confirmed. But the Hardings had become part of that lore, haunting the granite slopes with a presence too quiet to dismiss. Climbers passing through often asked about them. Some carried small tokens, ribbons, stones, even notes, to leave somewhere on the trail in their honor. One woman, a solo hiker from Colorado, posted online that she'd heard soft humming while camping near the northeast ridge. "A girl's voice," she wrote. "Like someone was singing themselves to sleep." The story was dismissed by some, but others nodded in knowing silence. The mountain held secrets. Everyone knew that. Each winter, when the snow fell thick and deep over the trail, the town seemed to hold its breath. During those quiet, frozen nights, the story of the father and daughter would be shared again, at the diner over coffee, on the radio during local broadcasts, in hushed tones between rangers preparing for the next season. People still wondered, had they fallen into a crevasse? Been buried in an avalanche? Or had they made camp somewhere so remote, so well hidden, that no eye, human or mechanical, had ever caught a trace? In the town's modest library, a single shelf was dedicated to them. News clippings, search maps, copies of interviews, and a notebook filled with community memories sat there, open for anyone to read. A hand-painted sign above it read, "Still climbing." And yet, beneath the sadness was a quiet, persistent hope, a hope that, one day, the mountain might return what it had taken. Not necessarily lives, not miracles, but answers. Until then, Mt. Hooker stood like a silent sentinel above the town, holding its secrets in stone. The wind would howl through its canyons, the snow would cover its trails, and still the people remembered. Because some stories don't end. They just wait. It was late summer when two experienced climbers from Utah, Ben Morales and Drew Lasker, set out to conquer a rarely attempted route on the northeast face of Mt. Hooker. They were both seasoned, methodical, and had planned the expedition for over a year. This wasn't a tourist climb, it was a test of endurance, trust, and skill, the kind of vertical challenge that demanded precision in every footstep and rope anchor. The mountain was quiet that season. The weather, remarkably stable. Conditions were as close to perfect as anyone could hope for. Their ascent had taken them across narrow ledges and sheer granite walls that hadn't been touched in years. This was a path few dared to take, its remoteness and complexity kept even confident climbers away. But Ben and Drew weren't just chasing altitude. They were chasing legacy. Midway through their climb, with ropes secured and harnesses taut, Ben stopped to rest on a narrow outcropping no wider than a fireplace mantle. He leaned back to hydrate and noticed something odd. Tucked behind a sliver of rock was a tangle of faded material, something not quite natural in color or texture. At first he assumed it was trash, maybe the shredded remains of an old climbing pack blown in by wind. But then he saw stitching. Zippers. A torn patch of blue nylon with a faint logo barely visible through the dirt and time. "Drew," he called quietly, trying not to sound alarmed. "You need to see this." Drew rappelled down to the ledge, and together they pulled out the old fabric. It wasn't just fabric, it was a bivy sack, collapsed and weather-worn, half fused to the rock. Inside was a sleeping bag, matted with dirt and torn along one side. Nearby, jammed into a narrow crevice, was a climbing helmet, cracked at the crown. The remains of a rope, frayed and stiff, lay coiled in a way no one would ever store it unless they'd meant to return soon. The two climbers looked at each other, realizing almost immediately what they had stumbled upon. This doesn't look recent, Drew murmured, his voice tight. No, not even close, Ben replied. And it wasn't abandoned. This was a camp. Someone stayed here. They backed up, documenting the site with photos, careful not to disturb anything else. In a shallow dip in the rock wall, Drew noticed something else, something deliberately placed. A clear plastic bag, wedged under a stone, its seal intact, its contents yellowed but legible, paper. Notes. A journal. They didn't open it. They knew better than to handle something that might be critical evidence. But the handwriting inside was small and neat, and on one page, near the top, Drew spotted a name. A name that made his chest tighten. Lily. They didn't need to say anything. They both remembered. The missing climbers from 11 years ago. The girl and her father. The mystery that had never been solved. Ben radioed the local ranger station with a GPS pin and a clipped but urgent message. We found what looks like a long-lost cliff camp. Possibly from the Harding case. Northeast face. Remote location, extreme exposure. Recommend immediate response. By the time they descended, word had already spread. The ranger who had seen the Hardings off all those years ago was still on the job, older now, grayer, but his voice trembled slightly when he got the call. You're sure? He asked, barely breathing. I'm sure, Ben said. No one else could have left this stuff. No one's been on that ledge in a decade. Within 24 hours, a full recovery team was on site. Drones scanned the face. Climbers with forensic training were flown in. Every move was deliberate. Every item collected with care. As word reached the town below, old wounds reopened. Locals gathered in quiet groups, whispering the names that had long since become myth. People cried without knowing why. Others simply sat in silence, staring toward the mountain, as if waiting for it to finally speak. For the first time in 11 years, Mt. Hooker had given something back. Not everything, not yet, but something real, something human. And for the families, the searchers, and the community, it was enough to stir a fragile, painful hope. The recovery team arrived early in the morning, just as the sun began to rise behind Mt. Hooker, casting long shadows across the face of the mountain. The air was thin and cold, even in late summer, and the silence was heavy, thicker than usual, as if the mountain itself knew something solemn was unfolding. Ropes were secured, helmets tightened, and the climbers descended slowly toward the narrow outcropping where Ben and Drew had made the discovery only days earlier. It took nearly an hour for the lead climber, a seasoned mountain rescue specialist named Erin Vale, to reach the site. She moved with deliberate care, treating the location less like a climb and more like a crime scene. When her boots touched down on the ledge, she paused, taking in the sight before her. The faded bivy sack, the torn sleeping bag, the broken stove half buried under rockfall debris. Time had eroded everything, softened the edges, weathered the colors, but it had not erased the presence. Someone had lived here. Someone had hoped here. She opened her radio. Cliff camp confirmed. Beginning documentation. No remains visible. The team above began lowering containers, cameras, and evidence bags. Erin began the painstaking work of inventory. The nylon sack was brittle but intact. The sleeping bag had insulation clumped at one end and a child-sized footprint still faintly visible on its surface. The stove was cold and corroded, but beside it lay a small pot with residue, as if someone had tried to make soup or melt snow. It was the journal that broke her composure. Tucked inside a sealed plastic bag beneath a flat stone, it had survived remarkably well. The front page was marked in looping handwriting, "Trip to Mt. Hooker, Lily Harding." The entries began excitedly, detailing the early days of their hike, where they camped, what they ate, how her dad had joked about teaching her to lead a pitch blindfolded. The tone was bright, full of love and laughter. But as the pages turned, Erin saw a gradual shift. The handwriting became smaller, more spaced out. The dates grew erratic. Then came the entry that froze her breath. Dad got hurt. Rockfall during anchor. He says it's just bruised, but I can tell it's more. He's sleeping a lot. I made warm drinks and tried to signal with the flashlight, but no one's out here. I think the storm is coming. Several entries followed, shorter, quieter. Lily wrote about trying to keep spirits up, watching the stars when the clouds cleared, listening to the wind like it might answer her. The final entry was simple, almost childlike. I miss Mom. I think we're going to sleep soon. Dad's holding my hand. Erin set the journal down, pressing her glove to her face as tears welled in her eyes. She was a professional, trained to handle disasters and loss, but there was something in those words that pierced through all her armor. They weren't just victims of a tragic accident. They were a father and daughter clinging to hope in their final days, trying to comfort each other on the edge of the world. The rest of the site yielded more evidence: a cracked climbing helmet, later identified by its initials, NH, for Nathan Harding. Nearby was a tattered glove, the kind Lily had worn in a photo still hanging in the town library. A length of climbing rope lay tangled beneath a rock lip, its color faded but still recognizable. Experts later suggested it had been used to secure their bivvy when the storm hit, a desperate attempt to prevent them from being swept off the ledge. There were no remains, no bones, no clothing that indicated where they had gone after the journal ended. A forensic geologist theorized that a small slide or snowdrift may have eventually buried them, their bodies carried down during thaw cycles over the years. Nature had taken them gently, slowly, and hidden them well. As the team ascended with the recovered items, journal, gear, and all, they did so with a reverent silence. The mountain had held its secret for over a decade, and now, piece by piece, it was beginning to release it. At the base camp, the items were laid out with care. The journal was handled like a sacred artifact. One ranger made a quiet call to Marla Harding, Lily's mother. "They've found something," he said softly. "Not everything, but something real." And with that, the silence that had endured for 11 years began to break. The journal entries and recovered gear were turned over to investigators and mountain experts within days. Forensic analysts, alpine search specialists, and weather historians were brought in to piece together the Hardings' final hours. It wasn't an easy task. 11 years of wind, snow, thaw, and erosion had wiped away much of the physical evidence. But between Lily's journal, the placement of the gear, and the terrain itself, a picture slowly emerged, one heartbreaking in its simplicity and finality. The analysis began with the helmet, Nathan's, confirmed by the faded initials, NH, scratched into the inner rim. The fracture on the crown was consistent with a rock impact. Not a fall, but blunt trauma. Likely from debris or a rockslide, a common hazard in those vertical corridors. Experts believed he had been struck while setting a final anchor or moving gear along the ledge. The position of the stove and shelter suggested they had established a temporary camp while deciding whether to summit or descend. That was when the mountain turned on them. Weather records from the week they vanished confirmed a sudden cold front had swept through the region. Temperatures had plummeted. Wind speeds topped 50 miles per hour. Snowfall in higher elevations exceeded a foot in a single night. The storm had likely hit them shortly after Nathan was injured. With communication down, either from damaged equipment or battery failure, Lily had no way to call for help. Her journal filled in the emotional landscape. In one entry, she described how she tried to keep her dad warm using both sleeping bags, how she made tea with melted snow and took turns staying awake. She wrote about flashing a headlamp in patterns toward the sky, hoping a plane or distant hiker might see it. But the cliff they were camped on, overhung and hidden in shadow, was invisible from above and nearly inaccessible from below. Rescue teams had been within a few hundred meters during the original search, but the outcropping's location and the heavy snowfall had obscured any signs. By the time the storm passed and clearer weather allowed helicopters to return, the fresh snow had already sealed over the ledge like a white tomb. Even their footprints would have vanished. Experts believe Nathan succumbed to his injury within 2 days. Without medical attention or the ability to move, his condition would have worsened rapidly: internal bleeding, exposure, and shock. The journal entries around that time grew shorter. Lily wrote that he was sleeping a lot and not responding much. Her own fear and loneliness bled through the ink, though she tried to stay brave. After his passing, there were only 3 more entries. She described keeping his hand in hers, trying not to cry because he wouldn't want me to. She talked about how quiet the mountain had become. In the last line she wrote, "Still no help. Snow is falling again. I'll stay here tonight." There were no entries after that. Investigators suspect she may have made a desperate attempt to descend or seek shelter further down the mountain after realizing no one was coming. The terrain below their ledge was steep, slick, and dangerous. A fall would have been almost certain. No remains were found, but that was not surprising. Avalanches, rockfalls, and shifting snowpacks can carry and bury bodies in places they may never be recovered from. Searchers combed the areas beneath the ledge, deploying cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar, but no further trace of Lily or Nathan was discovered. The mountain had kept their final secret. When the findings were presented to the family, it was done gently, with care. Marla Harding sat with her sister beside her as the ranger read portions of Lily's final entries aloud. Marla held the journal, hands trembling, and wept as she turned the pages. There were no dramatic conclusions, no miracles. Just quiet truths. Nathan had done what any father would, shielded, comforted, protected. Lily had shown courage beyond her years, writing, hoping, caring for her father until the very end. They had not panicked. They had not given up. They had faced the mountain with dignity, even as it turned on them. For the climbing community, their story became a symbol of both the awe and terror of wilderness. A plaque was later placed on the main trail, reading, "In memory of Nathan and Lily Harding, who faced the mountain together, and never walked alone." The answers, finally found, didn't erase the pain. But they offered peace. The items recovered from the cliffside camp were carefully packed and preserved, returned not as relics but as fragments of a life interrupted. For weeks afterward, journalists, climbers, and strangers from far beyond Wyoming reached out, sending messages of sympathy, recounting stories of the Hardings, or simply offering a quiet thank you. Yet as the news broke nationwide, missing climbers camp found after 11 years, those closest to Nathan and Lily were left grappling with a far more intimate question. Now that answers had come, what did they truly mean? Marla Harding sat at her kitchen table in Oregon, the journal resting gently in front of her like a fragile heartbeat. She had been reading it in pieces, unable to go through more than a page or two at a time. Some entries made her smile, Lily's wonder at the stars, her excitement over crossing a snowfield, her little jokes about Dad being a backpack hog. Others broke her, particularly the later ones where fear crept in like cold seeping into the seams of a coat. Marla would close the book, press her forehead against it, and sit in silence for long stretches, letting the ache move through her without resistance. There was relief, yes. Closure, people called it. But Marla wasn't sure the word fit. Closure implied something was over. And this didn't feel over. Her daughter's life had ended, but her love for Lily hadn't, and never would. The journal, the gear, the helmet, they were proof of presence, not absence. They brought Lily home, in a way, but also made the loss sharper, more real. Grief had gone from wondering to knowing. The town wrestled with the same strange duality. Some felt the mountain had finally done right, offering back the story it had hidden for so long. Others weren't sure what to feel. In the local diner, a few old-timers debated whether this changed anything at all. "They're still gone," one said quietly over his coffee. "But maybe now they're not lost." A service was held in the town square a few weeks later. It wasn't flashy, just friends, rangers, and a handful of climbers gathered beneath the cottonwoods, holding candles and listening as excerpts from Lily's journal were read aloud by a former teacher. One passage, chosen for its quiet bravery, left many in tears. "It's colder today, but the sky was beautiful this morning. I think we're still okay. Dad says when we get down, we'll eat at that place with the big pancakes. I told him he's buying." The teacher had to stop, voice trembling. A climber who had known Nathan in his younger years stepped forward after the reading. He spoke not about fear or tragedy, but about courage. "People think bravery is about taking risks," he said, "but real courage is staying calm when everything falls apart. That's what Nathan did. That's what Lily did. They weren't reckless. They were just caught in something bigger than they could escape." Some found inspiration in the story, an echo of endurance, of the bond between father and daughter, unbroken even in the face of death. Others found caution, a reminder of nature's scale and indifference. Debates began again in climbing forums about the need for improved GPS technology, better radio systems, more rescue funding. But no device could erase the remoteness of Mt. Hooker's cliffs. No tracker could undo the storm. For the ranger who had signed their permit all those years ago, it brought the weight of memory rushing back. He stood quietly at the trailhead one morning before his shift, staring up at the distant ridgeline. "I remember how sure they looked," he murmured. "Like they belonged up there." He left a wildflower on the cairn Marla had built for her daughter and walked away slowly, not needing to say more. In the months that followed, more hikers made pilgrimages to the site, not the exact ledge, which remained too dangerous, but to the area nearby. They left little stones, ribbons, notes. One child left a laminated card that read, "I'm scared to climb, but I want to be brave like Lily." In the end, the mountain didn't apologize. It never would, but it had finally offered a whisper of the truth. Enough to quiet the wondering, enough to feel like a goodbye. And for those who had loved them, that was something. Not everything, but something. The wind moved steadily across the high slopes of Mt. Hooker, whispering through pine needles and across jagged granite like a song the mountain had been humming for a very long time. From the air, the peak stood tall and indifferent, its cliffs sheer and silent, its shadow stretching across the valley below like the closing pages of a story. Snow still clung to the upper ridges even in the late summer sun, like scars the mountain refused to let go of. The land around it was quiet, vast, and unmoved by the events that had unfolded across its face. A drone hovered in place for a moment, its camera panning slowly across the northeast face. It captured the sheer drop where the Hardings had once set camp, that narrow, windswept ledge still barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. The footage would later be used in a short documentary, a quiet tribute, narrated not with drama or music but with Lily's own words. Her journal entries, simple, beautiful, raw, were read aloud over sweeping shots of the cliffs and sky. "I think we're going to sleep soon. Dad's holding my hand." The voice reading it paused before continuing, letting the weight of the words sink in. Viewers later said it felt like the mountain itself was listening, remembering. Down in the town, life slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Kids went back to school, hikers returned to the trailheads, and the last of the summer tourists passed through without knowing the depth of the story that had unfolded just beyond their view. But something had shifted. The Hardings' tale, once just a sad question mark, had taken root deeper than before. It was no longer about a disappearance. It had become about presence, how love leaves traces, even in the loneliest corners of the world. At the ranger station, a new plaque was mounted beside the visitor map. It held two small photographs, Nathan in his climbing gear, smiling confidently, and Lily with a strand of hair blown across her face. Mid-laugh. Below the images, etched in bronze, were the words. "They climbed together. They stayed together. The mountain remembers." Marla returned once more in the fall. She brought a small wooden box and hiked, with help, as close as she could get to the base of the cliff. Inside the box were copies of Lily's journal, a few photos, and a charm bracelet Lily used to wear. Marla placed it on a boulder in the shadow of the face, her hands trembling, her breathing slow and steady. She didn't speak. She just stood there for a long time, looking up into the rock. She didn't need to say goodbye. She had already done that. This was something else. A quiet offering. A moment of peace. As she turned to leave, a gust of wind caught her scarf, lifting it gently before letting it fall back around her shoulders. She smiled. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Back home, she would later tell a friend, "People ask me if I'm angry at the mountain. I'm not. How can you be angry at something that just is? Mountains don't take. They just exist. Sometimes, people get caught in them. But Nathan and Lily, they weren't caught. They were part of it. They knew what they were doing. They loved that climb. They loved each other. And they weren't afraid. There was a strength in that acceptance, one forged not through forgetting, but through understanding. She knew she'd never have every answer. But she had enough to let her carry her daughter's memory forward, not as a wound, but as something alive. Something bright. High above, the stars began to emerge one by one. That night, the sky over Mt. Hooker shimmered with rare clarity, untouched by clouds or storm. If you listened closely, you could almost hear a girl's voice humming softly beneath the wind. No panic, no fear, just the sound of someone who loved the mountains, keeping her father company under the stars. And somewhere, nestled in stone, their story remained. Not lost, not forgotten, just waiting, like the mountain, in stillness and in light.